Just a few more people that'll be joining us. Hello, hello. Glad to have you all back with us again. I'm asking you that you try to keep your sound off. Our connection looks like it's going to be pretty good, so we can probably keep cameras on for this one, which will be nice. And wow, you're here for the last true session. We had the last session of the summit. Now we have the last session of the bonus day. I'm a little excited that it's the last one. I'm also excited because I'm going to be introducing you to someone who's extremely dear to me, Carol Montgomery. And Carol, if you want to unmute yourself and I'll unmute you and you can at least say hi, and then I'm going to give you an official introduction.
Hello, Cynthia. It's a pleasure to be here. Love to bookend this wonderful summit, so thank you.
Thank you. So Carol and I took our Feldenkrais training together, and she and I and another person formed a nonprofit many years ago called Integrative Learning Center. And then Carol and I have been collaborating on integral human gait theory since that time. And I have found that Carol is one of the most cogent teachers that you will find anywhere in this field of rehab and movement and human potential. And I think that there was someone who asked in one of the sessions if we could ever see how the Feldenkrais method could work with the physical therapy in a more science or evidence-based way of being. And Carol is going to definitely help us see how that can work. In our own teaching style within integral human gait theory, we try to have a very clear connection between science, anatomy, and the Feldenkrais method and other things as well. She has a master's in PT, and she has studied relational and Gestalt therapy and has a certification in those areas. She has extensive education in osteopathic medicine, manual medicine, has been studying strain, counter strain, and gosh, it's just many things. And she's also done, I think, did you tell me 9 cadavers? 9 dissections? 9 dissections. I mean, this is very unusual to have somebody who's done this number of dissections and is working with people, so usually a couple maybe people manage to get through in their career, but 9 is very unusual. So she really takes learning seriously, and she takes building bridges for people seriously. So Carol, you're gonna join us in this and help us with the idea of how we can use language for successful outcomes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you. What I'd like to do is to share my screen so I can walk the members here through more than just a PowerPoint, but an interactive PowerPoint. I also have taken some of the wonderful comments that were given to me off of the Facebook feed of the summit, calling out what's their greatest challenge, what is they want to see. So what I did was try to infuse those questions, those hopes into this lecture as well. So I want to give you some foundational, but this is also experiential. So I'll try to tie as many concepts together and to simplify it as best I can.
And Carol, are you thinking that we'll wait till the end to take questions, or how would you like us to handle that?
Yeah, maybe so, because I'll be answering the questions that were already given to me within the lecture. So they may flesh out some of the questions that the viewers may have. So yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
And are you ready for me to share the screen?
I'm ready. We're ready.
Okay. All right. Let's see if this happens easily and effortlessly. Let's see. Mhm.
You have a share screen down at the bottom.
Yep.
There you go. You've
Did
got it.
it happen?
You've got it.
Okay. All right. All right. Great. Let me put this up here and slide this here. Okay. All right. So I first want to remind you of something, that the human body has an intrinsic and invisible drive to move. And also, it has several intrinsic capabilities that are somewhat out of your control that you have influence over. And that's the self healing, self regulating, and self adapting capabilities that are intrinsic into our own system. So, this means that your system knows how to accommodate, it knows how to compensate, and use anything it can to get the job done. Now, tonight, I know we have a lot of different people here in our community, and something is not happening, so hang on just a second. There we go. But there's two things that actually unites us, right? The first is that we all care about people's problems, and the other is that we, for some reason that's not populating. There we go. We want to help people no longer be in the pain of those problems. And when we do that, what we're trying to do here is another way of saying, how can we be extremely successful in our outcomes? So if you are a healthcare professional, when we think of successful outcomes, we begin to think of this concept of function. So Marcia, she is a dual credentialed PT and a Feldenkrais practitioner. And you know, she was really struggling with this dissonance that leads her just to give up the idea that they can't have somatic education and experiential in this linear goal orientated world. Well, I have to say that there's a possibility that we can have both here. All right. So as a healthcare professional, you get reimbursement, you get paid, you get graded by being able to achieve these functional goals that are set forth from your clients. Now, if you're in the wellness professional like yoga and Pilates, changing and maintaining body position is a big deal. So that too is a functional outcome. But I want to start to call something out that might be helpful here. So in the stages of learning, there's four of them. And this is also what we call the pathway to integration. And I love how one of the Facebook colleagues on the summit page, he had said that, oh, okay, we're going to learn how to balance this progress, balance the progress of getting a functional, successful outcome with the process of using somatic principles, somatic education. So one of the things that we realize is that up to now, if you've been new to this summit, in the last 10 days, you probably did not realize that you didn't know what you didn't know, meaning that you've done things the always way you did it, you got the outcome. We had people who would fall outside of the bell-shaped curve, and you just did the best you could, right? And you used every bit of your knowledge. Now you're introduced to another opening, another way to sense, another way to vision, and another way to feel, so that you might still have a change in functional outcomes. Okay? So now what's happened is, okay, you're starting to be conscious about something, but you're still incompetent. So I know I should do it, but I don't know how. All right. So let me walk you through an example here. This is a client of mine who came in. Her name is Joanne, all right? So this is her first day. She walks in, and we haven't done anything. So I'm just noticing how she's walking. Now, this is someone who has had good PT. You know, this is someone who has been able to do her stretches. She's extraordinarily faithful. She knows her exercise program. She runs it. Now, her functional outcome, of course, is not just walking and this increasing mobility. For her personally, she wanted to keep up with her grandkids, okay? And she wanted to be able to get back to exercise. Now, what had happened with Joanne is that she's had 3 foot surgeries and bunionectomies. And on the left side, the third surgery was to correct something that didn't work very well on that bunionectomy and still left her in a lot of pain. So when it's all said and done, she's happy that she's able to walk without an assistive device. That's great because she used to use a scooter, but she's still devastated that she's had weight gain. She can't get back to her life, but her grandkids mean a lot to her. She would love it if her grandkids, uh, if she could turn to her grandkids and say, "Come on, kids, keep up with me," rather than the kids saying, "Come on, grandma, keep up." So the first day that I saw her, 45 minutes, I began to, I worked with her in a laying down position. Well, that was familiar to her, but I did something else. I started working with her not just locally at the foot, but I wanted to see how the foot was connected to the knee, which is connected to the hip, which is connected to the middle of the back. And something that really surprised her was that I didn't do a lot of stretching and I did not get out a tool to help increase the tissue of the fascia. She's had that done before and it was very painful. In fact, the whole session was a relatively non painful experience, and that just really surprised her. So she gets up off the table, and some of you have experienced this. She's able to put her weight through the feet. Now, both feet up to this time were really very painful, but especially the left one. When she got up to walk, she didn't have any more pain in the right foot, which I didn't work on very much at all, and she had just a little bit of pain on the left. She was thrilled. Now, Joanne still walked with a straight leg out, but she felt good. So I see her back in 3 weeks. That's just when I had an opening. She comes in, her speed was incredible. She was elated. She was moving, but her knee was still straight. Now I have to tell you, Joanne could sit down and she could straighten and bend her knee. It was not painful at all. She just did not know how to bend her knee. She was conscious of the incompetence of not being able to bend that knee. She just didn't know how to do it. And she was telling herself in her mind, okay, bend the knee, bend the knee, bend the knee. But it just wasn't doing that. So here's what we did. So now, still applying this somatic intervention. Watch this. So now, 3 weeks later, second session. So watch how I start to use some cues here. So first of all, you see her on a very funny looking triangle shaped piece of foam. All right. And that foam has some density to it and has some texture. And then you will see me start to trace here along her foot. And I'm actually going to ask her to do something on the right side. The right side is her non-involvement side, okay? And so I'm asking her to lift her leg in such a way that she opens up the front of her foot. And I use this concept of hand signals a lot because people are very visual. A lot of times I try to do things that if I could not speak the same language of the person, how could I still communicate that which I'm trying to get across? So you see how I'm drawing attention down and into the leg. I'm having her notice that, okay, when something goes up, something is going down. Notice how she has her right hand and her left foot on the ground. In my mind, I'm calling attention to those because that woman is crawling, okay? She's crawling in that seated position. So I intentionally have her stop because I'm having her to rest. I'm having her to pause. I'm blabbing here so that she has a sense of resting. She's nodding her head. She's getting what I'm saying. I'm not saying anything new, just repeating. I point to this area here of how something's happening in her pelvis in order to have this up-down relationship go through her. She's saying, okay, so I'm going to ask her that she does not have to actually look down at her feet to do this. She could look ahead, okay? And so she did. So now I said, okay, all right, you have it in that position. Yeah, yeah, I really do. I understand exactly what you're saying. So now let's try this in the standing position. I want you to focus only on the right. I want to draw your attention down into the right leg, and let's see how you do that. Now, all of a sudden, this is significant to me. I don't know if you find this significant. She certainly did. She was elated. She goes, oh my gosh, I'm bending my knee, and I'm not really thinking about that. I'm not thinking about that at all. I can feel that as I lift the right, there was this incredible sense of a down. And then when I put my right foot down, it spontaneously started to lift on the left. But there's something else that's happening here. I want to show you something from behind here in just a moment. I let Joanne look down. I didn't say, okay, keep your eyes to the horizon line. I let her experience, I let her see what it is that she was doing. So her eyes were matching some kind of sensation. Here I'm just mapping again. She sees in the periphery. Yep, that's what I was doing. So I'm going to have you keep your eyes forward this time. Hey, that wall's right in front of you. There's a sense of safety. Touch it if you need it. No problem. No problem. So I'm changing positions now, doing the same motion. Her eyes are orientated toward the horizon line. And something starts to happen. She loves this, she doesn't want to stop. But I want to start to look at what's happening here from behind. When you see her weight shift, her buttocks move from side to side, she's transferring her weight. This is called like the center of gravity or the center of mass. Notice how different that looks from day one to day two of the treatment session. So there's something about organizing toward the horizon line, organizing a press and lift, and organizing this shift of center of mass. And how I present and use language of not just verbal, but of pressure. She loves this. She doesn't want to stop. This is the first time she felt like she was actually really sweating and she was really wanting to go for it. So when you start to direct attention or give people a point of reference, you begin to help them call out external and internal cueings that naturally improves or activates, reestablishes a pattern that was lost, that there was like this gap. You're beginning to connect some interdependent relationships. So for Joanne, I'm helping her know that, there's a wholeness in your foot, and that wholeness is actually, that unit of wholeness is a whole bunch of units of wholeness connected together relationally. And that is what we call, change this, thank you. That is what we call nested in function are patterns of movement. Patterns of movement. So that's what we're activating here. That's what you activate when you lie on the floor with somatic movement. When patterns of movement are reflexively activated, and when I speak of a pattern movement, I want to show you something. So you may be used to, here is your shoulder blade connected to all the way down to the hand. There is a pattern of movement that exists within here. Now you definitely have a wrist, you have an elbow, you have a shoulder, and you have a connection of the blade to the chest. There's also a relation of the eyes, the head, the neck, the torso, what we would call the trunk, and the pelvis. That's another relationship. But there's also another relationship of the lower extremity, because the lower ribs, the lumbar spine, the pelvic girdle, all the way down to the foot, there are patterns of movement that go on collectively. Collectively, patterns, or these regions, when they come together, they form these functions. The functions that you saw initially, the walking, the changing of mobility, the changing of positions, self-care. Now, for Joanne, originally in her physical therapy, and probably with some of you who've had problems, right? What do they look at first? They look at these local areas. This is where this is where my pain is, right here. But we know that this is where your pain is, but that pain is influenced by a region. That pain is influenced by how the movement of functional relationships between areas or regions make up a pattern. They're all influenced. So anytime that you can improve, like for Joanne, I just didn't improve her foot. I improved that locally. Yeah, she did need a little help there. And how the ankle was moving. Yep, she definitely needs some help there. But I know that how her ankle was organized influences that chain or that pattern, that region. And so when I started to change the relationship from the pelvis coming down into the foot, things started to say in the nervous system, there's something here. I can do this. And it happens quite spontaneously. So if patterns, function is nested in patterns, we have to remember that these patterns come about because of, essentially, they come about because of the primitive reflexes. Primitive reflexes, they start in utero, and they're there for probably the first 6 months, 8 months of life. They give way to something of another higher order of reflexes, like your equilibrium reactions or riding reflexes. So, so you cannot separate these patterns from these reflexes. If you do, let's say something really devastating happens and you no longer have access to the full length of that, well, your body's still going to accommodate, right, as much as it can. But your equilibrium reaction and your riding reactions are going to suffer for it, and you're more apt to fall. Okay? So the take-home message here is that nested in all function are patterns, and we are trying to improve the patterned relationship because patterns are reflexively activated, patterns are very predictable, and thank God they're reliable and consistent because they fire certain aspects of movement. And Nadia, she had wanted to know about, how can we find this equilibrium in the nervous system? Equilibrium in the nervous system she was referring to was this quality of ready to react, ready to respond. It's like without thought and still yet be aware. So responses for the most part are automatic. And when you have this awareness, the awareness of what? It's the awareness of the transmission of pressure through areas, through regions. When you have that awareness and that it's available, then the nervous system gives you a green light and it says, you're good to go. I'm going to give you this function. All right. So, how do you highlight that sensation of receiving pressure, that sensation of seeking, sinking down that lifts up? All right. So, let's go back to something that you already know, but you may have a misunderstanding of. This is probably one of the most humbling things that I learned about the nervous system. And it's this inner conversation that the nervous system has inside of me and inside of you. Now, usually it's pretty silent, covert, and out of your awareness. But I'll never forget the day when I started to experience what the nervous system was saying. I heard the nervous system say that on the screen. You have no control. And of course, my eyes bug out and say, what? Of course I have control. Of course I have control. No, you really don't. The nervous system and the depth of the nervous system is quite huge. It is charged with keeping you alive. It knows how to self-regulate. And like I said, it knows how to accommodate. And it will use any and everything it can in all systems. And up to now, we have 12 of them, right? Physiological systems. It uses everything it can to compensate and move you forward in life. And when you hear that you have no control, there's like a balloon. I felt deflated. And it was like the nervous system was kind of tap, 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 tap. Carol, Carol, you may not have control, but you do have a lot of influence, a lot of influence. And that gets me curious. It's like, what do you mean a lot of influence? So let me show you. So one of the things that you may not know or you may have forgotten is that when we go to map sensation, there's a difference between the baby's brain and the adult brain, okay? The language of movement from birth to childhood is initially not well differentiated, okay? So here on this left side of the brain, there's no coloring. So the adult brain has this mapping out over the years is mapped out of what's called a sensory and a motor cortex, all right? So initially, the tracks that are your sensory tracks and your motor tracks, they're not very good at all right? They're written in sensation and feeling that comes from those primitive reflexes, you know, nested underneath all function is those primitive reflexes. That's how it all started. So that's the major difference. You see this funny looking structure over here. Most of you would know that as in the brain, there is something called a homunculus. Now, it's rather a distorted representation of the human body. And this is, if you will, our neurological mapping. And it is dedicated to being able, I want to back up a bit. So this is how your brain, okay, here, that's how your brain sees your body. It's not how we see here when we look in the mirror or when we're looking at someone else. So it doesn't see it from that perspective at all. So you can see how those distortions are there. So all of those individual parts, they are then connected specifically to patterns within the brain. They go to different places in the brain, and and from those patterns emerge then the function. So So what happens is you start off here with not very many connections, but as you experience sensation with your interaction with your environment, you start to grow neurons. And these neurons get so well organized that one day they'll bring you into not just upright, but into standing and walking and running and moving out into your world. All right. So, so I want to recall that again, here is a little baby. I'm going to put this in slow motion for you because remember what I said, reflexes, primitive reflexes. And you're about ready to see one right here in this baby wren. Baby Wren is getting ready to turn over. And you see how her little arm bends and one arm straightens? That is a primitive reflex that is giving way, helping her to turn over. Okay? Now, this little baby, I want to say she's 3.5 months old here. So watch how she does this. So the that's not a true the reflex here is given away. Her little knees draw up. All right. She starts to change. The reflex goes away. Now she's able to move, and now she's going to make this turn. But notice something. Baby Wren has mastered something here because probably the first 20 of those, she was ah, because when she turns like that, notice what happens. Her left hand, her left arm is actually getting caught. So I didn't say to Baby Wren, whoops, sorry about that. I didn't say to Baby Wren, hey, hun, look, if you want to get that arm out of there, you got to pull it out. I didn't pull it out for her, right? I didn't say, hey, you got to shift your weight a little bit in order to get that arm out of there. She had to, she struggled a bit, all right? It wasn't painful, it was challenging, but there's a sense of struggle, there's a sense of push. Watch how she starts to, you can start to see her little left hand. There's something she's doing with the right. She does something with that left leg. She kind of moves herself in such a way. Look how she's going to get that left hand out. And now the right hand can come out. There's this sweetness of moving her center of mass back and forth in order to make that happen for her. Okay? So the reflexes that we're bored with help us develop this first level of sensation. And the sensation is this interaction with the ground. There's some kind of downward pressure that activates this change in center of mass. But look at this one. So here she is. This is a very um, sweet little pose that she's doing, and she must have did this for about a month. She was so pleased with herself when she was able to do this, and she gets up as high as she can. Now, in order for her to lift herself up, there's also an equal and opposite coming downward into the floor. And she is stimulated, she is motivated, she is curious of what are you doing over there, Carol? And that keeps her head turned, and that wants her to come towards me, but she doesn't have the ability to yet because it's still a blank slate up here. It hasn't been filled in yet. All right. So when we go to take this a little bit further. So remember I said that homunculus, that brain is stimulated, knows parts very well, and knows how to connect parts, knows how to bring parts that turn to pattern, that pattern that turn to function. Okay? Now, what happens when those parts can no longer be able to activate a pattern because there is something markedly wrong with those patterns? For some reason, okay, some reason we begin to prune away, and that's what you see over here on this. Something that was so richly connected is now taken away, and then now is just left. Something that when we um, no longer uh, have the ability to to have access to a local area. For some reason, it is lost. You know, we can see it on one sense, the thing that's more habitual in your life, whether it's your thinking, your movement pattern, or functional activities, our brain deteriorates. It likes that curiosity. It likes to tell differences. It likes what to feel the change, what's different. But the perception of pain or fear of pain also alters the brain's image of what's available. And that perception not only leads, we hear in the summit of our self image. Well, it's not just the self image that we think of in our mind that changes. The brain's self image of you changes. I'm going to say that again because I think that's just real important. So it's not just the image of how we perceive ourselves and what's available to move or not, but the brain sees way before you whether your part, your pattern is available and is already making decisions on what it's going to do in order to move you forward. So I want to talk about something that is probably glossed over in physical therapy and or in the healthcare field, and probably unknown to movement educators. So it's this concept of when the body tries to interpret cues of danger, it's always sensing whether or not we're safe or we're in danger. And quite frankly, it does not discriminate between being traumatic and just being overwhelmed and loaded. It reads it as the same thing. It's going to see if it's safe or not. Now, throughout the summit, you heard this example of this hierarchy being laid out. When you're safe, all right, when you're not thirsty or hungry, you can seek contact, you can seek and be in relationship with others. Well, the same thing happens internally inside. When the brain is reading that there is a safety between all parts, the pattern is available, function is going to emerge. If not, if there is not that safety and it is going to sort on, it won't be able to lead you to a function. So it is constantly reading behind the scenes. Are the sensations you're feeling safe? Because there is a large area, all right, of pattern, you can get the job done, but the more areas along that pattern that are distorted or not available, it will read in the brain as it's not safe, and we're going to have to really change how we're going to make this movement. And there's this continually mismatch of sensation to motor outcome, and these are the people that fall outside of our bell-shaped curve. They get some function back, but it really doesn't make the difference that they want in their life. So when we talk about, and this is probably what's going to be new for most folks, and it's this concept of in the nervous system, this is basic, we have a receptor. A receptor is the signal of sensation. For baby Wren, there's a signal of pressure, and that pressure comes through, and it has three options. It has either option one, blue, it's going to signal a group of muscular patterns, and you're going to have a response. Two, it's also going to signal something that goes up, and it's going to be mapping up here in the brain. All right. So this response here doesn't even have to go to the brain to map. It happens as a reflex. This is what causes us to have that equilibrium reaction if we're almost falling, if the pattern is available. If the pattern's not available, it will try to elicit the equilibrium reaction, but it will fail because there's no target. Now, here's the third thing. You see this purple line here? That information coming in also sends the information to your sympathetic nervous system. All good, all right? So there, the sympathetic nervous system is always working, right? It's always working, and it's in harmony, it's self-regulated, and it's in balance. But what happens when the receptor out here becomes nociceptive or transmitting a sensation of, oh man, this doesn't feel safe? It's pain. And so what happens is that the protective reflex gets activated. And the protective reflex is one in which is that if this receptor, which is now a nociceptor, instead of an equilibrium reaction here, now you're going to get this. Let me just change that. Now you're going to get this incredible withdrawal withinward. So something is protective, it's going to pull in. It's going to say, oh man, I can't move. And it's going to start to really bring you in some area of shutdown, usually locally, but then it will have an impact then more regionally and of course globally. So a lot of people think of this protective withdrawal as almost a disassociation. I think of it as that pruning away. If it goes on long enough, there's going to be a gap. There's going to be an absence of sensation, and the nervous system won't know what to do with that. If that protective reflex does not get resolved, again, you're not in control. The nervous system is. It's going to do what it can to compensate so that you can still get up and go to the bathroom. Okay? It won't look pretty and it'll be painful, but you'll get there. So if over time that doesn't go away, then this purple of connection gets excited then there's a part of you that can go the other direction. So you can have locally something withdrawing, but then you also have this, God, I got to move. This is, I cannot sit here one more. You know, I had a client who was going from his house to Wendy's, which was just three minutes away. And he had such leg pain he had to stop on the way to get out of the car, to walk around the car in order just to get back in the car to go and sit through drive-through. All right. He was stuck in such a high level of arousal. Every time he sat down, he had to come back up and he had to move because the nervous system is saying, look, we're seeing this as a threat and we've got to make an impact here. We cannot let you go any further on this. Okay. So, so when you have the process of integration, when you are learning something, you go through these levels all the time, and sometimes it can be very quick. You know, for Joanne, she didn't know that she was supposed to bend your knee. All for her, it was just about, I gotta get to the door. And then she became aware of, okay, I gotta try and bend my knee, but I didn't know how to do it. So now, if we really focus, right, now you're going to, in somatics, we say, I want to give you this conscious of where we're going to focus and give you this sense of competence. If I really focus on it, I'll be able to do it. And what is it that we're going to really focus on here? And here is your really big take home message. And we call this the organic formula. This is inside of you. This is something you can't help, but you can influence it a lot. It's there for you. And I want you to see these symbols on the right because I think tomorrow morning, in your next session with a person, use these symbols as just like little icons or indicators. When you see a horizontal line, I want you to remember that the nervous system organizes you for safety. And what that means is it's going to do everything in its power to keep your eyeballs level in horizon line. This is why you see people, you know, I treat someone who has a torticollis, all right? They will contort their body so that they will be able to keep as close as possible the lines of the eyes and the ears too toward the horizon line. Everything below your eyeballs accommodates all those parts, all those patterns shift to make that happen. That's kind of like top of the summit, top of dog, all right? So even your jaw, the skull changes to accommodate your eyes. You know, you have 6 muscles around each eyeball. They will accommodate one eye versus the other to make that line happen. The second thing that you want in a successful outcome is that you have to be able to realize that there is intrinsic inside of you this invisible, but feels invisible, but you can really capture it if you focus in on it. And it's this transmission of pressure. Then it's not only just it's not a push, but it is a sequential release of pressure that causes an equal and opposite reaction, like this teeter-totter. If something is going down, something is coming up. If something is moving forward, something is moving back. If something is moving into the side, something is moving away in any of the cardinal directions. So this intrinsic transmission of pressure and release. This is what allowed little baby Wren to, after she rolled, to get that arm out of the way. All right. She knew that there had to be some kind of shift in order to make that change. And here it comes. Here was something extraordinarily big. This intrinsic movement of the center of mass, or you may know it as the center of gravity. So it looks like a sunburst to me, all right? So your center of mass is that aspect of yourself that lies somewhere between externally of the gluteal cleft, all right? And inside the pelvis, right about here. So it sits in the middle of this pelvic bowl, and it is meant to move and change and works in quite concert with what's happening with the eyes. If the eyes and the head are doing something, then something is happening with the center of mass. If the center of mass changes, then something happens with the head, the eyes. All right? So there's this relationship, and that's why in somatic education, just working the relationship of the pelvis to the head through the torso, freeing up the thoracic spine, you're going to make a credible impact on anyone with any diagnosis. It's that powerful. It's that important in getting a successful outcome, especially in those outliers when people who don't get well. So let me give you an example, okay? So let's all do this together. I want to show you about the center of mass, okay? So if you're sitting, all right, I'm going to lean back in my chair. All right. This is from Kate asked this question. So she's got this client that she is a wellness professional. All right. And she wants to use the somatic approach to reduce and release the client's response to knee pain. All right. I like that word, reduce, release the client's response to knee pain. Now, the client, what she's seeing is a protective reflex right there. So the client is several years post-op of a knee surgery, all right? But every time that she bends her knee, okay, so every time she bends her knee and she has to load it in the weight bearing, whether she's going from sit to stand or whether she's going up a step, or maybe a warrior pose with that front knee that's bent, pain. All right. So let me show you how powerful the center of gravity is, because for for that client, she may have had really great knee rehab, but something was still amiss. And the intrinsic movement of her center of mass is probably lost. So if you lean back into your chair, and what I want you to do is I want you to take a hold of your knee in such a way, so I'm leaning back in my chair. I'm going to take a hold of my knee in such a way that I can hold below the kneecap. Now, I'm not encouraging that we bend our knee. That's not really important at all. Okay? So I'm using this back supported of the chair. I have one foot down on the ground, and this leg is lifted up into the air, and I'm just kind of cradling it. I have it. Okay. And so one of the things that you've done many times, if you look at the sun on the image on the screen, if you started to make a circle with your pelvis and be poor at it. All right. So you keep one area, you keep this area of the thigh bone connected to the pelvis, and you are rolling the pelvis in a circle as though that you could make different points of contact through the sit bone or on your thighs or on your buttocks. Right? No problem. Okay. Now, what if I said, what if you made a triangle? Okay. So what if you put your weight over here on this right side, and then you pull your pelvis forward, so you're sitting more up, so that you're having a point that looks like this. So we go from the right side, we can move forward towards the pubic bone, and then we could come back to the left. All right. So you can use any kind of shape that you want. I could even use a square. All right. So I could hold here and still make a square like. And as I still do that, I can feel, oh, something's happening across my back. I'm supported by the chair. But then I notice I come away from the chair and then I come back into the chair. So when you start to hold one aspect still, right? So we're holding this area of the knee still while we are moving the pelvis around the ball. We are changing our center of mass, the relationship to the center of the mass. And that in itself could immediately start to have a difference when she starts to stand up. So you stand up and notice, if you did this, that your one side feels very different than the other. Now, I was pretty quick and sloppy with that in one sense, but that is an example of how we can call out this intrinsic movement of the center of mass to change a functional outcome for her. And maybe warrior will be easier, all right? So what you're doing is we're trying to guide a person out of a stuck place, or we're trying to fill in a gap for them, all right? So ultimately, this is part of what your nervous system is really saying. The ventral vagus. I I I often use conversation. I guess it's conversation within myself. It's just like, okay, I can manage that. I can do that motion. You saw Joanne. I can do that motion. I can lift that leg. I don't know where I'm heading with this. I thought I came in here to be able to walk and bend my knee, but I didn't really work on bending my knee at all. But you know what? That feels safe. I don't have a problem doing that. All right. So the nervous system is going to be okay, have a green light. So now if I start, in order to develop awareness and to track awareness and to differentiate the awareness of sensation, these things here on the left are really quite helpful. You really already, if you're a healthcare professional, you kind of already know this. And I think the wellness care professional knows this too, especially the personal trainers. It's just that we change the language on you. When we talk about frequency and duration, I want you to start to think about pacing. You heard throughout the summit that when you go slow and when you go small, that's real important. And why is that? Because it's not for the client. You want to go slow for the nervous system. You're trying to develop and influence the nervous system. Remember, the nervous system isn't in control, but it says you've got a lot of influence. So if you go too fast and there is not that sense of relatively safe, the nervous system can't reorganize. We are trying to grow out something that's been pruned away. It won't sense that it's stable and its resilience is cut short. So that's why we do slow and small. All right. Now, I had to slow down Joanne because she, quite frankly, was loving the sensation that she was feeling, which leads me into this next thing. It was easy and it was pleasurable. All right. So you would know that as intensity. Now, I don't want you to get the notion that we don't do things that are difficult and challenging, because we do. The main difference is it's non-threatening. It doesn't elicit a pain. And when you see someone that's going through a movement and they do that kind of movement, you're listening a protective reflex. For them, they might say, God, I don't know why I do that. Every time I get to a certain, oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. That's a protective reflex that's going on. And in when you elicit that for the first 5, 10 times, how you want to interpret that and how you want to teach your people to interpret that, that's saying, hey, uh, I just want to let you in on this. This is a problem. We can't keep having that. I, I'm sensing that there's a threat here, that there's danger. I'm not sure what it is, but when you get to this point, or when you put this amount of pressure, when you go this speed, we don't have enough resources available throughout the region or locally in the pattern to make it work for you. So you're going to have to back that down. I mean, that's essentially what I say to folks. That's the interpretation that I want to help my brothers and sisters in the clinic understand. And the other thing here is this quality of tone. When we think of tone, sometimes we think of tone as an audible tone, but the tone can be in your touch, right? And it can be in the pressure of your touch, the handling. So it's in voice, it's in how you handle, but it's also something that goes on inside. So inside, it's like, oh, there it is again. Every time I go through that, I feel that pain. And so there's this quality of being patient. And a young person taught me the definition of patience, and I will share it with you. She says it's being kind while you wait. All right? Being kind while you wait, because it takes patience in order to develop enough sense of awareness, or how to track awareness, so that you can tell different sensations. If you can't make a differentiation in sensation, you won't be able to have a choice. And if you can't have a choice, the nervous system will not choose the best pathway that will lead you through a state of transformation. So, almost done here. So this is for the Marcia and Leslie. What's our best way to bring about a somatic influence into a linear experience? So function and patterns nested together. Well, when you do a movement, we want to offer you something you already know. Most people will recognize this as the developmental sequence. So when you start to do the same movement in different positions, starting at the lowest level of position, it will influence all the way down, just like patterns of movement influence function. So, for instance, one of the things that we do, like especially for people who are in yoga, let's work there. Or I've even seen this in doing some physical therapy in stretching. So I am sitting forward in my chair. Okay, if you can do that. And I'm going to put my hands up like I could have my hands against a wall, okay, in front of a wall. And I'm going to take this right hand here and I'm going to slide the hand up the wall. I'm in a seated position. I'm unsupported. That's a higher level, by the way, besides supported. Okay. Now, first of all, how'd you do there? Any pain? Okay. No pain there. Okay. That I really want to know if that is painless because there's something that's going to happen with the organic formula of successful outcome that I want to make sure can be supported. So I'm going to ask you, we're going to do it again, and I want you to pay attention to your sit bones or the pelvis that's weighted on the chair. So when you begin to take that right hand up, I want to know, do you stay on both sit bones or do you tip and you go onto one sit bone? And if you do tip, is it the same side that the hand is up or is it the other side? And you're thinking, I don't know. I have to do that a couple times. Let me see. All right. So, okay. So I'm going to give you the cue. Maybe you can't tell. So I'm going to give you the cue, the verbal cue of, well, let's reach up towards the ceiling. So as you start to reach up to the ceiling, are you on the same side of the sit bone or on the opposite sit bone? I'll give it one more try. Reaching toward the ceiling, or maybe you don't move at all. Okay. And then if I go to the other side, that's interesting for me. I move pretty quickly over here. I don't stay as level. For me, I'm going on the same side. Now you think, now how is this used in yoga or Pilates? How is this information? This the ability to be able to bring the hand and reach, there is an equal and opposite reaction that's happening or that could happen in the pelvis, in the press and release, and in the intrinsic movement of the center of gravity. If it's not going to happen in the seated position, it's not going to happen when you're in the kneeling position, and it's not going to happen in standing. So now let's stand up for a moment and do the same thing. So here are my hands. I'm going to take this right hand up an imaginary wall, and I'm going to go up and I'm going to start to reach into the top of the ceiling. And then I come back down. Now, do you notice that as you start to reach into the top of the ceiling, do you notice that there's an equal and opposite press going down into the same side, or does it go into the other side? See what happens over here. Now, seems so benign. Now, for some folks, they can lift the arm, but there's no transfer of the center of their mass, okay? So when they start to move, when I start to bring this hand up, what happens is they still stay, the midline of who they are stays here. There's no transfer into that foot. There are some folks that when they start to transfer, that the middle of them starts to move over towards that foot. Now, why is that important? That's the signal for a lot of function for sure. But in yoga or Pilates, we give this instruction of, reaching up towards the ceiling and grounding the same foot. Hold, push the ceiling up, push the floor down. All right? And then we ask them to do this. How many times in physical therapy have you asked someone to stretch out this side, right? You're telling them to stretch out this side. When you stretch out this side, are you on the same foot as the arm that's up in the air, or did you switch over? A lot of times, folks will switch over and ground on the opposite side. This does nothing to help influence patterns that will give rise to function. This does nothing to help with these equilibrium responses. So when one of the students said, I've got a, um, I've got some clients who have really bad back pain, who have really dural tension, nerve tension. So by the time you have something like that, those protective reflexes have already in the nervous system accommodated in such a way that there's nothing more that they can accommodate. So when they go to start to get a natural pattern of lengthening on the same side and then fold or bend or do some kind of stretch, and they don't still stay grounded, then what happens is you're fostering unconsciously a level of pattern that is not going to help them become as functional as possible. So in yoga, from this posture, lengthening on one side, giving weight or ground, it will turn into a tree pose for folks, right? It will turn into the ability to walk up the step. So when you start to guide someone and you're starting to give them small doses, here is some language that has helped with my clients, all right? So we're taking the organic formula and we use these kind of options. I use models a lot because the truth is people don't know what they look like inside. So if you don't have models, use books. When you see an image, you can map the image on the model with their hand, like the image of here in the pubic area where you would want them to press or find how you accept pressure if they're laying on their tummy. And then you map that image on their physical body. It's probably one of the most potent things that you can do is have their hand map this skeleton and their hand map that on them. Okay? So when you ask them what they notice, realize that the word nothing is significant. All right? So nothing signifies that there is a gap, there's an absence, there's a pruning, and that you need to guide them. You'll be able to guide them along a pathway of these different regions of the pattern that will allow something to start to emerge. Now, words that suggest a function. So when we started to reach up, I use that's a functional term. If I were trying to really try to change the shape of my spine and somebody wasn't really getting this weight shift from one side to the other, I would ask them, if you were going to toilet care yourself, I would ask you to wipe your rear end. That would immediately shift them over to one side. You know something else I do? I come and sit right by them and I say, can you scoot over? So this scooching, I can see how they can move from side to side. It's a little trick, but it works. So I'm seeing what they can do spontaneous without them thinking. So words that suggest a shape or a change in shape. So you have images, I draw them out. The shape of legs, you change the space, you open the space. How wide can it be? How narrow can it be? What would the shape change be? Words that feel. One of my favorite words comes from, this is a 3-pound weight, and sometimes I will put this weight in a person's hand, and I feel how that weight causes this kind of sinking to happen, and the hand sinks down. When you lift your hand, can you feel an equal and opposite? Can you feel something within you start to sink? Or maybe I'm changing a shape and it's like I'm cradling something, all right? Maybe there's an imprint, all right? And what would you do to fill in that imprint, the imprint of the shape of the foot, the lines of it, you trace them. And then finally, and I guess I use my hands a lot, as you can tell, sometimes I think of the person as being deaf, that they really can't hear what I'm saying, but hand signals mean a lot. Like for Joanne, she could feel, that was raising, that was lowering. Got it. Move in, move out. The shape change, yes. So hand signals. So we often think that language is inaudible, but it's actually more than just audible. It's actually touching in certain places. So I hope that has been helpful to you. So your big takeaway, of course, is really coming back to those symbols and the process of integration. Ultimately, the last stage of learning, of course, is you don't even need to think about, oh, I'm pushing up and something pushes down. It just happens. And that's what a reflex is. All right? It happens, it's there for you, and that's how you know that your nervous system says, I'm in control and I have you. I'm not out to get you. But if you can give me more information, I'll renegotiate how we're wired inside and I'll give you a better outcome. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Carol, very much. Thank
A
you.
lot of information, I know.
A lot of information, yeah. Let me see if I can take a couple of questions out of the chat and
Thank you, Beth.
take a look at them. So we've got people that are just excited, of course, but I'm going to try to go for the things that look like they could be something you might be able to respond to. What would be appropriate for weak eye muscles in which the eyes quiver back and forth, involving the head to tilt to one side in order to find a null point to stabilize the eyes to focus?
Good. So are the eye muscles actually really weak, right? From a physical therapy perspective, I wonder if that isn't the eye's compensation. Is it coming from actually the nervous system from the brain? Okay. So one, I have to keep that in mind, that it's coming from something deeper and not just one of the 6 muscles that are weak. And so as you start to change the head, you are trying to help the eyes find that sense of levelness. You know where I would go? I would go down to the pelvis. All right. I would begin to really start to see how could the weightedness and the options of the pelvis influence and shift that pelvic, torso, and neck relationship. I would go there. And if that seems like it is too close to the change and it is exacerbating, then I would try the arm. Try how do we move through the arm in different ways that would change the mass, the center of mass. Because the more that you can bring safety, the more that the nervous system can read safety of the center of mass, it will allow this shift to be a little more available up at the eyes.
Thank you. Leslie asks, you're Leslie, in case you'd like to know, what is the best way to work with people who have kyphosis or rounding of the upper spine? I have many older yoga students who have this happening. Many of them do not have upright posture, possibly posture available currently, I think, or possible currently. They feel stuck.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. For me, I would go and explore the developmental sequence, particularly being able to be on hands and knees, we call that quadruped, okay? And then also in the tall kneeling. And you say, well, you know, Carol, these are older people, so they may not like to be on their hands and knees, all right? You're not going to keep them there very long, but you want to be able to explore how this transmission of press and release can happen through hands and knees. For instance, you would do a cat-cow, right? So in the cat-cow, you know you have your hands and your knees set up in a specific position. But what if, Leslie, you moved one hand, I'll take this right hand and I'll drop it right underneath my belly button. And I bring the opposite or this leg a little closer to the hand that's near the belly button. What if you did a cat-cow from that position and that the pressing was coming from the center of the hands, the center of the hand, and the center of the knee that's closest to the hand? That you would do a cat-cow, but in your offset of your hands. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to not go all the way into cow because they can't get there because of the skeletal changes, but you're trying to have a sense of a press into the floor that allows the shift or change in the pelvis. So it's coming back to that center of mass. How can the center of mass move and not just be in the 4 points that make a square, but in 4 points that make more of an inside and an outside? So that's a way to do it.
Thank you. Jen asks, any recommendations for the healthcare provider, PTOT, looking for somatic education for continuing education? Well, I think we might have an idea too.
Well, yeah, we're working on that, right? So, you know, for specifically, we do a class. We have, it's called Gait for Wild Human Potential. And so we use gait as the functional outcome or the lens. And there's a certain aspect of gait that allows this three aspects to be constantly changing and using somatic education to do that. Whether we use the Feldenkrais method and also things that we've learned from movement intelligence from the Ruthie Alon's work. Cynthia,
Yeah,
you
and so we have workshops scheduled, but of course this year we may not be able to hold them in person. So we already offer CEUs for those. So the in-person workshops we do. What we're trying to do now is come up with an online option, not because we think online learning is better, because we really don't. I mean, we really don't. You know, I host a summit, but I have to tell you over and over again, the learning in person is always better. However, I get that you can't do a summit and make that an in-person thing anymore. It would just be too costly to do something like that, I think. Certainly couldn't make it for free. So we just have to figure out how to do the online CEU portion at this point, and we're looking into that. Within a couple of weeks, you are going to get options on how to make a next step, and hopefully one of the next steps will be at least a beginning workshop with some CEUs to get people exposed to Carol and my's way of teaching around this topic. And when she says gait, I know this is a little bit of a tough sell sometimes for PT and OT, because the perception seems to be that, you know, it's kind of old hat stuff, but this is not old hat stuff. You know, even if you take the model of adding the somatic education to it, that right there makes it new for you, right? But also there's some components in the model by combining various models together, along with a couple of components that we have brought into it that are novel and different and will make a really big difference in your understanding of gait. That's also true, by the way, for Feldenkrais practitioners. You were taught no explicit model of how gait works at all. You were unlike PTs and OTs who are taught a very explicit model that we think is a little bit limited, could be a little bit more dimensional. Feldenkrais practitioners are left to figure out gait through sensation alone. And we don't think that's quite sufficient either. So I think we have some things like that to offer. Now, of course, you could take, there's not a lot of people offering online Feldenkrais somatic education with CEUs, to my knowledge. I don't think there's anyone yet. So I think we might be the first ones. But you could take other programs. Usually the Institute out of New York, when they hold programs, often have CEUs for PT, OT, and I believe often maybe Jeff Haller's as well out of Washington or Portland. I'm not sure which one. Yeah, it does as well. He's from the West Coast for sure, Upper West Coast, but I don't remember exactly. Yeah, so maybe that'll be helpful to you. What I think I'm saying mostly is stay in touch with us, because I think we can get you started in a good direction. And then also you can just kind of watch what happens on feldenkrais.com, and you can keep asking on the Feldenkrais Summit Facebook group, which is called right now Move Better, Feel Better, because that was the name of this year's summit. Yeah.
I see there's a question here that someone's talking about, yay, I understand your discussion of center of mass. However, what does the center of gravity really mean physically? And I think I want to address that because I think that's important. When you see a baby and you experience yourself in the seated position, and I'll go with something even more simple. Let's say you're going to wipe your rear end, okay? You're going to do some toilet care. What can you speak about the physical qualities of when there's a shift? Well, obviously, yes, that when I go to reach around, there's an equal and opposite. There's something about the physical quality of something shortening in an area and something that causes it to rise. And there's this kind of downward stacking that is going on, but I'm not collapsing into that stack. I have to be at least long enough in order to get far enough in order to make a change from down below. So when you speak of the physical qualities, there is one of which there's something that is being transferred from side to side, like you're moving a box. There's something about there's some kind of folding, then shortening. There's some kind of lift at the same time that there's a downward pressure. So I'm not sure if that's helpful or not, but and I use that kind of language for folks.
Ferry asks, do you explicitly try to solicit non-directional idiomotion movements that are non-volitional but within conscious awareness in your client training and therapy? There is a hypothesis that idiomotion could result in non-volitional self-correction movements. If so, what would you structure your verbal communication to bring about the most of these self-correcting?
Okay. Here's a simple one. Okay, we do, actually this is in the gait class. Okay, so sit back in the chair. And when we are trying to activate and sense this concept of transmission of pressure, we first have to feel that something is sinking, right? So in the foot, I'm going to go to this side here, all right? So I'm going to lift this foot from the ground. Okay? It's not very far, Fairy. It's about like this. I lift and then I lower it back down. Now, pause for a moment. You can do that. And I actually say, you can do that. This is what helped Joanne. Oh, yeah, I got that, and there's no problem. Great. Because that just gave her a success that, oh, finally, they're asking me to do something that I can do. Now I'm saying, okay, there's a non-volitional movement happening, but now I'm going to ask you to have a conscious awareness of it. When you start, you just start to lift this foot from the ground. You haven't even cleared the ground yet. Let it go. Try it again. You start to lift the foot from the ground. The shoe is in place on the ground. The foot is lifting from the shoe. Can you feel that there's something happening on this foot? And I ask this question, does it go down or does it go up? And each answer means something to me. It reflects to me what's happening in that nervous system. So yes, I do use and call that out in my therapy. And so now, well, here's the second thing. Okay, I feel it. Joanne says, yeah, I feel that. So she starts to lift. She starts to feel a down. Now, can you take that down and then can you just begin to press, exaggerate that going down a little further, 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 further. And then all of a sudden, this comes up. Because, like, when you're in that rehab setting and you're seeing people doing this exercise, right? I see this a lot. I do some volunteer work in a rehab, and this is one of the things I help them with. The cueing is that if this is going up, I want them to cue. Can you feel the language is the press of the down that gives permission of the other to rise? Give yourself permission to go down in order to come up. So that's another way I do that.
Thank you very much. There is another one in here that I want to capture, but for some reason I'm having a little trouble finding it right now.
Is it fascia?
Yeah. Can you just go ahead and type in your question for us, Philip? But there was another one besides that. So is cat cow an arching and rounding of the spine? I think you got the answer to that from Spy up below, which she said yes. Gosh, I know I saw one more that I really thought. Okay, somehow or another. I mean, I'm very happy, of course, to see all the positive comments, but I want to be sure we.
Oh yeah.
Actually grab the questions that need to be addressed, but I
think what I hear this question is, how do the limits of fascia and connective tissue, how it limits the potential for learning, especially if it's dysfunctional? Okay, so within all fascia, there are these rich sensory receptors, right? And when there's a threat to the area, okay, the nervous system, remember that loop that you saw? When the nervous system elicits a protective reflex, the fascia may not be the target tissue that's under threat. It may be a joint capsule. It may be a ligament. It may be a blood vessel. It may be an organ. That may be the target tissue that's under threat, and that will elicit in the nervous system the protective reflex around it. Now, that withdrawal and that protective reflex then stimulates not just the pressure receptors in there, but if that is held over a longer period of time, it's not just mechanical pressure, but chemical pressure also stimulates locally. Now you have a protective reflex protecting something, but now you have other areas being stimulated because of the protective reflex and how they have to hold that over time. So now you have mechanical, you have chemical, and so now the movement that exists along that chain, if you will, is actually dysfunctional. So it gets dysfunctional from a neuromuscular component, but then it also gets locally dysfunctional from the fascial component too. I hope that's
Thank you.
helpful.
Thanks. It's wanting to know if tendons can turn into bone spurs and if the connective tissue might be able to be just a little bit ossified or stiff or thickened.
Can tendons turn into bone spurs? Let me hear that first. So at the junction of where tendons meet the bone, there definitely can be bone spurs there, absolutely. And the bone spurs, that's your nervous system's beautiful way to help the skeletal system handle, hey, too much load here. We need it's pulling this apart. Okay, no problem. We're going to lay down bone cells. We're going to put that down for you. And now it doesn't lay it down so organized. It then kind of mounts it and it becomes a spur over time. So that then changes the mechanics of how it goes across that joint too. So that's the first answer to that question. What was the second part to it?
The connective tissue might be a little bit ossified, stiff, or thickened.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. It has
Okay.
a different texture quality. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Perry, we're going to be this will be the last one. Perry asked, how much palpation do we do in our workshops?
It's more of a self palpation. There were a time when we had more clinicians that we actually felt, particularly the movement of the thoracic spine, because that was just so critical. Because a lot of therapists are not familiar and can really sense what's going on here. But we were sensing that movement because of what we were doing with the head or with the arms or with the legs or the shifting of the center of mass, how that had to accommodate. So there's not a lot. I think it would also depend upon the audience too. So we have the capacity to do that.
Yeah, it's not so much. That's really not, I think, what gets missed. What really gets missed in an online learning for our particular set of workshops right now is we normally have pre and post walks, and these are so incredibly instructive for everybody. I mean, you just learn a huge amount about it. There's a lot of teamwork done in terms of growing observation that will all have to more or less go away. I mean, you can observe some of it on a Zoom session, but you're never going to get the same quality of that observation. So those are the pieces I think that we're going to struggle with the most. And also the way that we teach, we normally would teach 3 days in a row, and we're actually looking to give people a really strong, I call it a big bolus of information, which I know is a healthcare term, but basically, like a big shot in the arm of enough information to really disrupt the habit pattern so that people have a bigger chance of integrating it over the longer haul. Somebody wrote that she took the workshop several years ago and that she still feels she's walking the way she learned in that workshop. And that's going to be not true for everybody, of course. I mean, change is a multifaceted, multi-step process for most of us, but many people, talk about how impactful it is, and we actually have both therapists and non-therapists that return 3 and 4 and 5 times for what we call the same workshop, but we do keep changing a lot of information in it. And I think that's going to be it, because I got to tell you, I gotta go. I just have to, I
That's
just have
right.
to do it because I'll just like die on all of you if I don't, because there's still like a lot of work to do yet tonight. So
Okay.
much
We do want
love.
to
Appreciate.
remind people, right? We do
Pardon?
want to remind people about there is a
Oh,
link.
giveaway.
Did you
Yes.
get that?
Giveaway. There'll be a giveaway below the replay. It's not up yet, but when the replay goes up, Carol has a giveaway for you, which is one of the videos that we have in Integrative Learning Center's small library. So that's the nonprofit that we run. If you want to check out, it's integrativelearningcenter.org, integrativelearningcenter.org. Or ilcma.com would also get you there. But I think Integrative Learning Center, while it's long, is actually easier to remember. And yes, well, thank you. I appreciate that being a legend. You're welcome. So much love to all of you. And
Yeah,
do take
yeah,
advantage of Carol's giveaway. And
yeah.
you won't even get on our mail list for it because that organization is not that sophisticated yet. But I will make sure you get a chance to join us for whatever we're going to offer for GATE. We'll put out an email in about a week and a half, 2 weeks at the most, that'll give you next step options according to what your needs are. So we'll have several next steps for you there, and possibly one of them will be just perfect for you. Okay, much love and appreciation to all of you. Thank you for being with us here for this last session, Carol. Thank you
You're
again.
welcome. You're welcome. My pleasure.
Yeah,
My pleasure.
it's just a pleasure to teach and learn with you, and it's a pleasure to have all of you hungry to learn more. And so, you know, we will continue on this path together.
For sure.
Be
For
well,
sure.
go out, move better, feel better.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.